Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
This is episode 28 of the FAB podcast on Wisp Sports Radio.
Excuse me.
The FAB podcast is the weekly show brought to you by Females in Athletic Business for women in the sports business, where we believe that women in sport deserve equal coverage. Welcome to this week's episode. My name is Kristin Ray, and I'm the founder of Females in Athletic Business and one of your hosts of the FAB podcast. Today, we are welcoming back Kathy Grayson, career consultant for PGA of America. This is our third and final installment of our Salary Negotiation for Women series. Previously, we spoke with Kathy about the best tactics for women negotiating their first salaries. Then we also got advice from Kathy on how to propose a raise or a promotion at our current jobs. We will be rounding out the series today, talking about how to negotiate a salary during a job change. So when we're accepting a new job at a new company, how do we make the most of that opportunity to crank up our salaries a bit? So welcome back, Kathy.
Thank you, Kristin. I'm so happy to be back. It's always really fun to speak with you and talk about how women can increase their salaries and how we can help empower them.
Well, it's been a wonderful 2 episodes so far. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm positive our listeners have too. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of how to make sure we're getting the most out of a job change, talk a little bit about why when we're changing jobs or changing companies, it's such a unique time in terms of our salary opportunity.
Yes, it is really exciting. It gives us the opportunity to kind of wipe the slate clean and start again. One of the interesting things in this century is that the stigma of job hopping is sort of shifting with the new millennial generation and the terms of employment. What am I trying to say? The time that someone spends in a job is greatly reduced compared to what our parents experienced.
And it's not frowned upon like it used to be, maybe is what you're saying, as much.
Yeah, it's starting to shift. So you still really want to make sure that you stay in a job for at least a year before you consider making a change. But in the past, where our parents would stay in a position for 20 to 30 years, that is definitely shifting. And the millennials, with the changing of technology and how quickly everything happens, we have to be more accepting of employment terms from anywhere 3 to 5 years. So 5 years is really the accepted amount of time for a job change. But, there are circumstances where you can make a change if it's going to benefit you in terms of learning new skills, having the opportunity to increase your compensation and benefits because you're going to a competitor who maybe pays a little bit more. It gives you the opportunity for to explore new management styles and processes. And so it's all about really advancing yourself as far as your skills and opportunities to broaden your opportunities and your skill set.
So let's start at the beginning. If we are in a job and for whatever reason we decide it's time to look elsewhere to make a change, once we get into that first interview with a potential new employer, either sometimes in the application process, but a lot of times during the interview process, they're going to say, what are your salary requirements? So where do we start? I know sometimes you have an instinct, obviously, for most of us, probably tell the truth. Is that the best way to go? Do you tell them kind of where you're at right now? Do you tell them where you want to be? Do you tell them a little bit higher than where you want to be? Like, where do we even start when salary first comes up in that process of interviewing or applying?
So we want to be very strategic when we answer that question. And actually, we kind of want to divert that question as long as possible. So timing is very important when you're beginning to discuss potential salary and benefit packages. And, the one thing that you want to do is, and I tell my golf professionals this all the time, if you don't really want to answer the question, ask them a question in response to theirs. So if somebody says, what are you making at this current time? And, what are your expectations? I think an appropriate question to them would be, what are your expectations as an employer? And what are the top 5 successes that I need to know in order, key elements that I need to know to be successful in this position. So try to turn it back to them as much as possible. If they absolutely are adamant about a number, you want to give them a range. I know in previous segments, we talked about how important preparation is. And when it comes to salary, it's extremely important that you prepare ahead of time. So you do your research on the company, you try to get as much intel as you can from employees that are, in that company already. What are the average salaries for that position? If you can get that information, you can also look on some of the recruiting sites online, make phone calls to competitors. There's a lot of research that goes into being prepared for that salary question. So give a range, make sure that the low end of the range is a number that you can live with. And when you're trying to determine what that number is, make sure that you're looking at net income for yourself. So a lot of times someone will say, 80,000 is the lowest that I can go. Well, have you taken into consideration taxes and Social Security and all of the things that are going to be deducted out of that bottom line salary, including healthcare insurance? So you want to make sure that when you're giving a range, that bottom number is a number that you can live with and is a net income that is acceptable to you.
And ideally is a couple steps up from where you came from, right? I mean, that's not always the reason we leave a job because of money, but there aren't a ton of opportunities that will come our way in terms of timing in our careers where it is appropriate to try to make a step with our salary. And this would be one of them, right?
Yeah, correct. I mean, you always need to evaluate, why are you making this move? Are you making this move because you're unhappy with your current manager? Do you, in doing your research, are you currently, the salary that you're currently making, are you in the range? And, obviously we always want to, try to increase our salary and compensation, but you have to look at what your skill set is and the job that you're applying for to make sure that you are qualified for that, and then, go from there. So there's a lot of strategy involved, and there's a lot of research involved in negotiating a salary for sure.
Okay, so in the first episode of this series, we talked about tactics for negotiating your first salary, and you made it very clear that it is very acceptable, if not recommended, to not take the first offer, because so often, especially with women, we're leaving money on the table when we do that. And that a lot of times men negotiate naturally and women just accept what's offered naturally. So once we're offered the next position after our interview series, should we follow that same rule of thumb that just because it's not our first salary and this could be our third or fourth or fifth job, that chances are we shouldn't take the first offer that we're given?
Yes, ladies, only 7% of us negotiate salary and benefit packages. 53% of men always negotiate salary and compensation and benefits. So employers do not expect you to accept their first offer. In fact, sometimes it's frowned upon. It shows them that you don't value yourself to negotiate with them, and you're just willing to lay down and accept whatever they have to offer. So you want to make sure that you go ahead and negotiate. If they don't want to negotiate actual salary, there are other things as far as benefits that you should be looking at. Vacation time, flex time, bonus structure, there's just so many different variables that you can negotiate, and employers expect you to do that. And the more research that you do and the more that you show them the value that you're bringing to their organization, the more apt you are to increase your salary and your benefits.
So I think it goes, I mean, there's just no understating how important that process is.
So important.
I love that you said it's almost frowned upon. Like there could be companies that are going to look at the fact that you took that first offer and wonder, gosh, is she outgoing enough for us? Is she serious enough? Is she confident enough?
Is she desperate?
Yeah. She desperate to get out. Why does she need to get out of that job so bad? Things like that. That's a good point. And I'll share my story. I think I shared it in that first episode as well, quickly. At my first salaried position, I made that exact mistake. I was so excited to get it when the woman called and offered it to me. Before she even told me how much it was, I said, be there Monday. And she said, okay, we're very excited for you, but never do that again. And I said, do what? And she said, accept a job, A, on the first offer, and B, without asking what it paid you. Because that was just, I mean, I was very young, so I had been given no guidance on this, which hopefully we're helping people get out of that situation by doing these podcasts. But she clearly had some sort of thought about me because that's how I handled it. And luckily she was willing to share some wisdom with me regarding it. And I'll never make that mistake again. But that was proof that she made a judgment about me at that point because of that, just like you said.
Absolutely. Especially if you're going into an industry where you may be negotiating pricing on behalf of the company, or you may be, discussing contracts and again, negotiating terms of contracts. So you want to make sure that your employer understands that you're confident about yourself, you're confident about your abilities, and you're confident about the skill set and the value that you're bringing to them. And if you do that, then you will receive the proper compensation and benefit package.
Here's a question that I think of a lot when I think of people switching jobs. I hear it a lot. I have a couple of friends in HR that I know have dealt with it a lot. When is it okay to take an offer that we've been given by a new company back to our current employer to see if they would match the new offer? I know most of the time we're not going to be looking for a new job unless we have a reason to be at the old job or not be at the old job anymore. But maybe a company just approached you with an offer and you're still thinking about leaving the old job. There are a couple different circumstances where this could come up. So when is it appropriate to take that new offer back to the old employer if we're in fact still kind of contemplating making the change for sure?
A couple of different things. First of all, really take inventory of why you are looking for a job change in the first place. So, job changes, again, give you tremendous opportunity to increase your skill set, meet new people and create an entirely new network, and helps you advance your career. So why are you leaving your current job? Often, especially women, have an emotional attachment and feel that they're abandoning their employer. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to take a new job and then take the counteroffer to your employer, have them say they'll match it, and then just accept it because you feel guilty. You really need to think about, if I take this counteroffer, how does that solve my problem, the problems that I'm facing already? So are you going to learn new skill sets just because they gave you, the extra money? Are you going to take on new responsibilities? Do you have an opportunity to maybe change different departments and explore other skill sets that you have? So taking counteroffers, I don't see people accept counteroffers very often unless you just absolutely love your job. Maybe this competitive company reached out to you to try to convince you to come and work for them. But, you have a vision and a career path in this company and there's opportunity for growth. That would be the only time that I would say to accept a counteroffer. But when should you approach your employer? I think as soon as you know and have made the determination that this is an acceptable offer, I always encourage my professionals to make sure that it is in writing and both parties have signed it, because what you don't want to do is get excited, run to your current employer and say, you have a job offer coming, and then have that offer not be an acceptable offer. And then you've really put yourself in a
sticky situation for sure.
Right. So make sure that it's in writing, that it's acceptable by both parties. And then, make sure you go back to your employer, set up a time to talk to your manager. And believe it or not, Friday afternoon is not a good time because obviously, if you're a valued employee, they are going to be upset that you're leaving. You certainly don't want to ruin their weekend. So, if you can catch your manager on maybe a Monday afternoon or a Tuesday morning, that's actually a more favorable time to, let your employer know that you're most likely leaving and give your notice.
Okay, so that was interesting. That's very specific. Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning seems to be the best time to do it. Okay.
Right. I mean, if you think about that, Friday afternoon, we're all excited for the weekend and, you want to go have an enjoyable weekend. And then Monday morning, we're usually very busy trying to catch up and plan for the week. So those are two really bad days to tell your manager that you're thinking about leaving, that you have this offer and, see what they're going to say.
So I also liked what you said. You kind of mentioned that we should trust our instincts. If we got to the point that we were interviewing for other jobs and getting offers from other jobs, chances are there was something you were looking for in another employer that you weren't getting with your current employer. And just because your current employer may be willing to match or slightly go above the offer you're getting at the new employer doesn't mean that you should question or decide not to leave because there was probably something that sent you in another direction in the first place. So I like what you said, because I think you're right. I think there's so much emotional attachment. We put so much of ourselves into our jobs every day that it'd be really easy to feel guilt or feel that loyalty, especially if they're willing to match the money. So I liked what you said, kind of just trust your instincts on why you started the process in the first place.
Yeah, sometimes money isn't everything. It's, work-life balance. It's opportunities, again, to create a new network. It's a chance to, explore a different skill set and maybe give you an opportunity to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And, I think as women too, change, and this is probably for everybody, but I think it is more so for women, change is fearful in everything that we do. Do we move to a new city? That's fearful. Are we going to make friends? Are we going to like our job? But we really need to look at, is money that important in your life? Are there other things that you need to take into consideration? I mean, obviously, you're expecting a baby. I mean, that's a huge consideration when taking a new job. Do you want something that is going to be really stressful and demands a lot of your time when, you have children at home that you need to spend some time with? So you really need to weigh the benefits and the work-life balance and everything that's important to you personally, as well as money.
Absolutely. So here's something I always think can be really touchy and awkward. What's a professional way to be talking to a company or applying with a company without raising red flags with your current company? I have heard this from at least 2 women, even in just the last couple of weeks, who were thinking about possibilities somewhere else, but the thought of their current employer finding out that they're doing research or even putting feelers out sends them over the edge with anxiety because they've literally said to me, I will be fired if they know that I'm checking out other options. What do you do when you're basically stifled by the fear of losing your current job if you look for a new job? How do you talk to a new employer that you're researching or you're applying to and let them know I'm really serious about the fact that you can't talk to my employer?
Yeah, I think most employers understand that. I was actually conducting interviews this week for a director of golf position over on the East Coast of Florida. And one of the mistakes that the candidate made was talking too much about it. So he had contacted area professionals to kind of get some insight into the club. He had talked to some members at some competing clubs. And, sometimes when you talk too much and you give out too much information and you involve too many people in your decisions, that's when you get in trouble, because that's how your employer finds out. And it creates a sticky situation again. So I think the best thing to do is really don't talk about your desire to research or go interview with a company. The less people you tell, the better off you are. And employers understand that they cannot contact your employer without your permission. And again, when I'm conducting interviews, that's one of the first things that I tell employers is, look, some of the candidates that will be here today are employed. This is a small industry. This is a confidential meeting. And, please do not contact references or talk about the interview outside of this room so that we don't jeopardize anyone's job. So I really believe that employers understand that. I think it's the employee or the person interviewing that really usually causes that issue. And it's because we have a tendency to talk too much and include too many people in our decisions.
And that makes sense. Do you know anything about the ethical or legal ramifications of firing someone because they're researching another job? But that seemed, when someone said that to me, it seemed like, oh, they can't do that. But I'm sure, I don't know if it's a can't or, is that something that companies really can do?
I think it's a state by state, law. In Florida, it's an at-will state, and I have seen it happen. So it can happen. And again, that was a result of, somebody talking too much and the employer finding out. I've also seen it happen where a recruiter knows both employers and has advised the candidate to make sure that he does inform his employer. And I've seen that employee lose his job that way also. So, my advice is, twofold. Number one, don't talk about it. And number two, if you're going to tell your employer, be prepared to possibly not have a job. So, it depends on how badly you want out of the position that you're in. One of the things I wouldn't do is research other companies on your corporate computer at work.
Oh, absolutely. And I bet people make that mistake a lot.
People make that mistake all the time. And, company computers are the property of the company, and they have the right to go back through your emails and your text messages if you have a company phone. And that can certainly affect any severance package, that maybe if a lot of times some of the corporate executives will have contracts and severance packages built into their contracts. So I've seen that happen too. I think the less you talk about it to outsiders, the better off that you are. And employers understand that they cannot contact references, without your permission. One of the things that I would do is provide a reference page to them of people that they can contact that you trust, that will keep your that will be confidential, keep your confidentiality. And then if the employer asks you for a reference from the company, let them know that you'll provide that as long as you know that, you're going to have an offer.
Right. Okay.
It's a sticky situation. And again, if you're just out interviewing just for the heck of it, I'm not sure that that's a good reason to do that. But if you're actually adamant about job change, then, I think it depends on your employer too, whether or not you can have that conversation or not.
So going into an interview or a serious offer negotiation talk with a sheet of references that you can say, here are some people who I know you could call maybe prior to an offer if you're interested in my references that, that would be, appropriate or safe. Safe might not be a right word, but basically giving them a list of options to call on for your reference that doesn't include your employer that you really trust would be a good idea maybe to take into those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that at least shows them that you're open and that you're honest, and you do have colleagues or past employers who will, give you a good reference. And they're going to understand if you say, I'm currently employed and I'm not comfortable with you contacting my employer because I certainly don't want to lose my job if this wouldn't, if this isn't, something that's going to work out. And I think they're very respectful of that.
Okay. Well, good to know. So when we get the offer, we've negotiated the salary. When they say to us, how soon can you start? We all know the phrase 2 weeks notice. We know that that's the fairly traditional answer. Should we stick with that? Has that changed at all in how the times have changed in this, in this industry? Or you mentioned a couple other things are kind of fading away in terms of tradition. Is that still the customary and absolutely appropriate answer?
Yeah, 2 weeks is still very customary. I think it depends on what type of position you're in as well. I think executives usually like to give, 30 days notice, 60 days notice. I know that's the case in our industry at the general manager or COO level, just because that's a more high level position. And there are, several departments that need to, be advised and have an exit strategy in place. And, how is that the management of that company going to work while they're in transition, looking for someone else? Regular employees, probably anyone under director's level, I think 2 weeks is very adequate, and that's customary. And again, that can be negotiated with the employer.
I feel like, again, I could just talk to you on this topic for forever, because I think there's so much to be learned and so much to be put into action, especially in our industry and with women. But do you have any final advice or words of wisdom for women who are approaching one of these kind of 3 moments in their lives, whether it be their first salary or, looking for an improvement on their title or their salary at their current job, or stepping out into the job change world? Any final advice for us?
I guess my advice is be confident in yourself, be confident in your abilities and your skill set, do your homework, prepare, and, just show your value to your next employer. We are breaking the glass ceiling, and we are achieving some terrific positions within major corporations, and it's really an exciting time for us. But we really have to show our value, be patient, be confident in our abilities, and empower one another. That's my advice.
Empower one another is really important too. I think just making sure we're always doing as much as we can for each other is important, and we don't often talk about that. But I want to say thank you so much for all of your advice and your time and your wisdom. There aren't a lot of women who are so qualified to talk about this who will donate their time as you have. And I truly think this set of episodes can act as a really comprehensive guide for our listeners in their careers, no matter where they're at. So thank you so much. Tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you if they maybe had a specific question about negotiation, if you're willing, and maybe just how they might be able to run something by you if they didn't have a resource for themselves.
Absolutely. First of all, it's been a pleasure, and I've really enjoyed our time together. And I love to be involved in things like this and help empower other women. I think the best way to get in contact with me is probably through LinkedIn. It's Kathy Grayson with the PGA of America, and my contact information is on my page. And I would be happy to speak to anybody who is looking for advice or information about the golf industry.
Well, thank you again so much, Kathy. And I hope we get to stay in touch. I hope you stay in touch with the organization and with the podcast.
Absolutely. I would love to.
Conversations from the world of women's sports. This is Wisp Sports Radio.
Wisp Sports Radio can be found on any podcast app. Follow Wisp Sports on social media at Wisp Sports. Please give us a 5-star review on iTunes to help promote coverage of women in sport. Thanks for listening and supporting women in sport everywhere. To follow Females in Athletic Business or this podcast, use @FABSports.org on social media. The FAB podcast is a co-production of Females in Athletic Business and Wisp Sports. Check out Females in Athletic Business at www.fabsportsorg.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next week.